everyone, Hexi here. Today, I'm hitting you up from a slightly different perspective because I'm going to be doing a tutorial on Blender today. So, first thing you're going to want to do is make a donut. Go up here to Add, go to Mesh, and add a torus. Whoa! Look at that donut! That was so hard. I bet you understand exactly how to use Blender now. All kidding aside, now that we're done with that shit, you're probably noticing that my default scene starts out with nothing in it. Well, I'm sure you're used to seeing the scene start with like a cube and a sun and a camera. And it's usually oriented something like whoop, that and something like that. This is usually how it starts out, right? So if we just get rid of all of this, I'm sure you do that every time that you start up Blender. Well, if you do all that and you hit Defaults, Save Startup File, you can save yourself a lot of time because you won't have to delete those cubes every time. However, I'm going to be adding the cube back for this tutorial. Now, one of the most useful tools is right here on the side, the scale tool. You should get used to using it. I'm going to go into edit mode, which you can do by going here, because if you start scaling things in object mode with this little button here, the scale button, it'll only scale it in the world space and it will not preserve the transforms. So with the button on the side here, you can grab these little handles and scale on one axis or the other. However, you can also simply press the S button to scale the whole thing uniformly, or if you want to do it on one of those axes, you can press the X, Y, or Z buttons in order to scale along that particular axis. Also, if you're ever moving or scaling something and you want to omit an axis, like you only want it to scale on the X and Y axis and not the Z axis to make things wider, you can hit Shift and then the button that you want to omit, and you can scale on X and Y or X and Z by pressing either Shift X, Shift Y, or Shift Z. Another useful tool is being able to bring up the search bar with your spacebar. In order to set that up, you need to go to Edit, Preferences, Key Map, and then up here at the top where it says Spacebar Action, you're going to want to switch it from Player Tools over to Search, because being able to search means we can bring things up quickly, like the Subdivide option, which you can, says that you can get to it by a menu using Control E if you wanted to subdivide that way. So let's try that. Control E and Subdivide's down here. If you subdivide, then you have more surfaces to work with. And see, we were able to learn the hotkey by using the search function in order to find out how to access that menu. So we're learning the user interface by using the search bar to search for functions that we want. Now, with the Subdivide tool, a lot of people say, oh, it's easier to add geometry than it is to remove it, so you should use a Subdivision Modifier. However, with a Subdivision Modifier, you can't be very precise with what you're subdividing. So if you only want to subdivide a few things and not everything, then you're going to run into some trouble. And now I'll show you how to get rid of some of these lines if you decide that you have too much geometry. So right now, everything's concentric. We can press Alt and click on an edge to select the whole edge loop. And then if we bring up our search bar and use Dissolve Edges here, which is in the Mesh menu, we can get rid of that line. And if we do it here, we can get rid of that group of edges. Whereas if we were using the Subdivision Modifier, it just makes the whole shape round. Right now it's only showing half of the number of subdivisions in the viewport compared to what it's actually going to do. So if we want a more full picture of what we're doing, we can crank the viewport level up to 2 so that it shows exactly what it's going to show when we render the image. Now another useful tool is if I get face select up here, we can use the Extrude Region tool to drag out a point. And as you can see, because of the Subdivision Modifier, it's making everything rounded and smooth. It's not very precise. However, you can also just press E to extrude a region. So if we just press E, we can raise up a similar lump from the side. And then if we extrude these two faces, and then I take this one, we can make some weird shapes with the Subdivision Modifier. If you're looking for these weird sorts of curved shapes, you can totally do that using the modifier. However, if I was to take the modifier away, we go back to cubes. So that's something to consider, whether you're going to be using modifiers or if you want to subdivide the object yourself. Doing it yourself gives you more control, whereas using the modifier can make a nice uniform appearance. I also recommend getting yourself a cube to start out with, so that you can do all sorts of experimentation with your sample cube. That way you can grab edges and move them around and see how it affects the geometry. And also, there's the rotate tool, which you can use to rotate geometry. Just be careful that you don't have geometry that overlaps, because otherwise this will look really screwy when you go to render it. You can also rotate things by pressing the R button, and then you can lock it to a specific axis, just like with scaling, by pressing the X, Y, or Z buttons, or excluding a direction by pressing Shift and X, Y, or Z. Now I'm going to go back into object mode to delete this cube again, so that I can show you some more stuff. One of the hardest concepts for me to grasp was probably how to make something like a arm or a leg for a character. So I'm going to give you an example. I haven't perfected this technique myself, but I'm starting to grip the concepts. So I'm going to share those with you. One way that I like to start is to place a circle. Circles are very easy to work with, and you can adjust how many edges your circle is made up of. It normally starts it at 32, but if you scale it way down, you can make it a triangular circle or a diamond. You can make a hexagon or a pentagon. octagon, you know, whatever. I'm gonna stick with 10 sides though, since that seems good enough for what I'm gonna do here. If you're going to be trying to make the leg or arm for a character, you're first going to want to put down a face so that you can extrude this circle into an actual mesh shape. Then you're going to want to press E to extrude up, and then you probably notice in most legs that partway up it turns into a calf muscle. So in order to represent that, I'm going to extrude up again, scale out, and then usually the front of the leg is like flat where the back gets rounder. So I'm going to move this layer along the y-axis to make the front flat. So I'm going to go to View, go to Viewpoint, right side, and I'm just going to move this layer along the Y till the front's flat. And then I'm going to do the same, extrude up, scale out, and then G, Y, and boom. We've got an outward curve now. Now it's time to bring it back in. Extrude with E, and then we're going to scale it in a bit, and then we're going to G to move, Y to move it forward on the Y-axis, make that front flat, and boom, we've got a calf, sort of. It's close enough. And then we're going to want to make 3 edge loops here, and the reason why will become obvious later. Now you could put some shape into it here, but I'm not gonna. I'm just being lazy though. If you were doing this for your own personal reasons, then you might do a better job of making these edge loops. So now I'm going to make the thigh, extrude up with E, scale it out, and the thighs actually move forward a little bit, so I'm going to only slide this back a bit, then extrude up, scale out, extrude up, scale out, and then at some point you'd start scaling back in. Now, one of the concepts that has been eluding me for a long time is how to add armature. You're going to want to add a single bone. Now, the bone's buried somewhere inside this leg, but don't worry. So if we select the armature, come down here to the Data tab, we can go to Viewport Display, and then we can select some some properties for our bone, like making it always in front. So now it'll appear on top of your mesh, and you can edit it from the editor. You can also change the shape to like stick bones, but I'm gonna leave it on octahedral for now while I'm rigging this up. Now, the next thing that we're gonna want to do is move our bone into the position we want. So we're going to need to go to edit mode with the armature selected, and I am going to select this end handle, which is where we're going to want the base of our thigh to be. So I'm going to take that and move it up, and you're going to notice the bone changes size, and that's just because this is just a representation of a correlation between this bone and the objects it controls. So this little octahedral part will automatically scale, but it's not actually going to show up in the render. Now I'm going to move this second handle up to where my knee will be. And I should place it somewhere near where I want the bend to happen. So if I go back to my right hand viewport, I'm going to want this to be near the front of the bone because that's where it's going to have the most influence. So G, Y, and I'm going to move it up a little. And then if I have the bone selected like this with the end that I want, if I want to add a second bone to this, I can just extrude down to where my ankle would be. And now this bone will affect the calf and everything below that line. And this bone will affect everything above that line. But right now, it is unrigged, so it won't actually affect anything. If we go into pose mode, we can wiggle this all around, and it does fuck all. Now, if we want our bones to actually move our object, we're going to want to select our circle, then we're going to hold Control and select the armature so that the armature is in yellow and the circle is in orange. This is the object that's going to be joined, and this is the object that's going to be joined to. Okay? Now, if we make parent with automatic weights, automatic weights, the program is going to try and automatically paint the weights onto the object for us. This saves us having to create vertex groups ourselves. So if we go into weight paint mode, we can see that bone 1 is manipulating the lower leg, and bone 2, or the original bone, is manipulating the upper leg. And there's this nice little blend in the middle where one part partially controls this bit and the other part partially controls that bit. Those are the extra edge loops that we added in, and it's going to prevent mesh deformation whenever we go into pose mode to actually move this around. So if we go back into object mode, select our armature, and go into pose mode, now if we wiggle our bone around, you can see that it actually bends. You can see how the knee bends there in the middle. Well, if I had not included that, let me just make a new circle. Now just move that back along the y-axis. Create face with F. Whoop. Edit mode. Create face with F. Extrude it up. And then extrude it up again. Now we've got one set of vertices for the joint. If we were to go and add a new armature, and then go down here, put it in front so that we can actually see it. Move it G along the Y, stick it there. Now, if we go ahead and we take our bone here and go into edit mode, we can take this handle, move it up with G to move, put it at the top, take this one, G to move, Z to move it on the Z axis. We're going to want to put it near where we had our edge loop. Then we're going to want to extrude down to add that second bone. Now if I go ahead and do the thing, select the circle, select the armature with Control click so that armature is yellow again. Oh, I forgot to go back into object mode. There we go. Now we can do this, and we're going to want to make parent with automatic weights. Do that. And then if we check our circle, go into weight paint mode, half is controlled by the bottom bone, and half is controlled by the top bone. So now, if we select the armature, go into pose mode, and we were to rotate our bottom bone, as you can see it starts folding and shit. This is not the effect we want. We rather would like to have something like this one, where when we rotate it, it folds and bends in the middle. So that's why we added those extra edge loops. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean all this up so that we can go on to the next section. I'm going to want to add in a brand new cube just to show off some of these functions. Let's go to our front viewpoint, and then I'm going to rotate up slightly. Go into edit mode. Let me bring this cube up a little more. And I'm going to want to select these two edges. Now, I've seen my fair share of Blender tutorials, but I don't see a lot of them talk about the Bevel Tool. And it's really a helpful tool if you're trying to make stuff in Blender, because you can slice the edges off like this to make a nice sharp corner at a perfect 45-degree angle. Or if you scroll up, you can add geometry to make these nice curved corners. And then let's say you've got this complicated top mesh now, but you want to like add a piece that can move. So let's add another mesh. I'm going to add a second cube, go into edit mode, and I'm going to select this back face. I'm just going to go ahead and G to move it, Y to move it forward. Boom. Gonna take the top face, move that up. And select the bottom face. And then I'll move that up as well. Now let's say we wanted to make this hollow. There are several techniques we could use. However, for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and inset the front and back faces so that we have... somehow got out of edit mode. So I'm going to select the front and back faces. I'm going to use the Inset tool. And I'm just going to make a nice little hole there. Now, I'm going to go to select mode, select this, and let's hide the first cube so that we can select the bottom. And there we go. Delete that, just the faces. And then I'm going to select the edges here and here. And then I'm going to press F to make a face. And then I'm going to do that here, and here, and here. Select two edges, and then F to make a face. Now we've got this nice right angle, but our cube has a curve there. So what are we going to do if we want to have this right angle preserved in our shape, but still keep this nice rounded edge the rest of the way around? Well, one thing we can do is go into Object Mode, select our original cube, and add a Boolean Modifier. Now if we select our second object, we can use Difference to subtract the part where the handle intersects with the object. So if we go ahead and apply that modifier, now if we get rid of our second cube, you can see that it has these notches in it. So if you wanted to make a piece that intersected with this particular object, you can use the difference boolean to subtract. Likewise, if we select that first cube and we do boolean union, we can select the second object, and now it's going to add that second cube instead of subtracting it. Now if we get rid of the second cube, you can see that it's now part of the original mesh. So that makes it all one piece, and hopefully it won't have any wasted faces in the middle, but we have to check to be sure. So let's go into edit mode and look at the wireframes. And if we select faces, as you can see, all the faces are on the outside and there are no inside faces, which is very handy dandy for optimizing things to be used in video games, because you don't want to be rendering faces inside your object that aren't being used. And it looks like down here there is one tiny face at the bottom of the handle that got left in. That's just because it wasn't joined up perfectly. At any rate, I feel like I've been going on for too long now, so that's enough about Blender. I have a lot more to talk about, and I didn't even get to UV mapping. So stay tuned for more, because there'll probably be another Blender tutorial in the future. At any rate, that's all I've got time for today. Ciao for now, and Hexi out. Thanks go out to my Patreon supporters. Your donations mean the world to me, and I thank you for supporting my future endeavors.